Hi, I'm Don Davis. I'm at the Bullpen, and we are currently talking with a panelist for rare disease. And so with that, I just would like to turn to my fellow panelists and ask that you introduce yourself. Would you start, Sharon?
Yes, hi, I'm Sharon King. I am a patient advocate, and I have claimed patient advocacy as my priority role since July 24th of 2006, when my daughter was diagnosed with a very rare disease. Since that time, I've been working diligently to try to carve out a path forward for children living with CLN1 disease. It's been hard, but we're seeing a light now, and I'm happy to be here and joining this panel to talk about that.
Thank you for that.
Hello, Patroski Lawson. I run a small public affairs firm in DC, but the reason why I'm here is because I'm representing the Rare Disease Company Coalition, which is a group of about 25 companies, emerging biotech companies that are focused on rare disease innovation in this country. And just happy to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
My name is Ester Caffarel-Salvador. I'm a scientist by training, and I'm now the director on strategic innovation at Chiesi. Chiesi is an Italian pharma company that has three pillars: air, rare, and care. So I'm here because I'm part of the rare pillar, or the Global Rare Diseases Business Unit, which is a full integrated unit headquartered in Boston, and that's where I'm based.
All right, so let's stay with you. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming up that's more promising in terms of rare disease.
Yeah, so we are hearing like every day about new technologies, and like we see from a scientific perspective, it's very exciting to see that the breakthroughs that are coming one after the other, right? Like 20 years ago, no one knew what CRISPR was, like, having nanoparticles, or like, everyone has been schooled up with the COVID vaccine. And I think like that's great in terms of breakthroughs, because there are so many technologies that can provide solutions or curative opportunities to rare disease patients. So that's what my team is looking at. Just to say a few more words on what we do, because Chiesi Global Rare Diseases has 10 products in the market, but primarily are biologics and small molecules. And a couple of years ago, my team was assembled to look at this next generation of therapeutics. So we are interested in gene editing, gene therapy, like mRNA, siRNA. So we screen over 70 therapeutic modalities, and we are just trying to merge them or marry them with rare diseases, because I think it's very important. Each rare disease has its own mechanism of action, and you need to really understand the disease in order to find solutions. So I think there is a lot of exciting science there that needs to be moving forward, and that's what my team in Chiesi Global Rare Diseases is interested on, like spotting the science and engaging on partnerships to support it forward.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else on the panel?
No, I think that's wonderful. I used to work with Chiesi as a member of the Rare Disease Company Coalition. So as a company, you get it. We need to protect innovation in this country, actually globally around the world. But the U.S. is sort of the hallmark or the centerpiece of innovation in this country or in the world. And we need to make sure that we're continuing to do everything in our power to make sure that the biotech rare disease ecosystem is vibrant in the U.S. So it's great to have you here, and it's nice to meet you.
It's really challenging as well, right? With smaller populations and, really, dealing with rare disease. It's, truly a challenge overall, I would imagine. To try and find the interest and get groups, excited about it. Sharon, anything additional that you would share with regards to this?
Sure. In my experience, CLN1, my daughter had a form of Batten disease, CLN1 disease. There are 350, 400 children known globally. So very ultra rare. I don't typically use the term ultra rare. I would rather just talk about a very small population, because I don't think we've really characterized, what makes the difference in a few patients and 199,000 patients.
Right.
And we're seeing rare diseases begin to move forward for these larger population rare diseases. But these really small ones, we're seeing good science move forward. And I can use CLN1 as an example. We started this small grassroots nonprofit that I founded, started funding a proof of concept for gene therapy in 2013. After 3 years, it moved to industry. We actually had an IND within 2 years. And then everything stopped. It was radio silence. all we heard was a loud clock ticking in our community. We kept wondering, what's going to happen? Where's this going? Why aren't we hearing more? An IND? Isn't there a clinical trial upcoming? Well, we heard nothing. And I think what happened was the company, even though they had this IND, you start thinking about the complexities and the cost of development to get through a clinical trial for a very small population. Everything stopped. It was eventually sublicensed to another company. Protocols were announced. So a couple of years later, protocols were announced at the World Symposium. Families, international families were preparing. They were proactively preparing, hoping for participation to be screened for the trial. There was a family in Australia who was getting passports. They were, making plans to put a job on hold so that they could get to Canada, in hopes of their daughter being treated. And then they hear, we're breathing down enrollment, and they hear that it's stopped. We're pulling patient communities to, that edge of hope, and then they fall from the cliff. And that's what worries me right now, that we have this wonderful science, and we need better pathways to make sure that wonderful science gets to the people who need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Patroski, would you mind just answering, what do you feel are some of the main challenges that you see with regards to rare disease?
Well, I mean, we've heard a lot of them here. And
Yes,
the companies
exactly.
are trying,
Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans believe that innovation in this country is happening by way of NIH
Right.
and the federal government. They have no clue.
Mm.
And actually a lot of policymakers as well. They have no clue as to how the biotech industry works, right? And they think innovation is not coming from companies like Chiesi. They think it's coming from NIH. That's a huge problem, right? Because there are a lot of politicians. It doesn't matter whether you're on the right or the left or in the middle. You see that and you're like, well, why can't we just fix this problem? Why are companies starting programs and stopping programs? So that's a huge problem. It's policymaker distrust and mistrust and lack of information about how the business of pharmaceuticals works. That's one issue. The second issue, I think, is access. There's a lot of great innovation out there. Oh my God, the iPhone 17 is great, I mean, maybe a bad analogy, but my point is like innovation for innovation's sake doesn't really help the end user if he or she can't afford it, right? And Bentley is great. Bentley's amazing innovation, but that's not accessible to where most people are. So $3 and $4 million therapies, wonderful. I'm not saying that we should discontinue. We shouldn't do all of that. We should, but we need to be as rigorous in figuring out how to get these therapies in the hands of the people who really need them in all communities, not just well-to-do, affluent Northeastern communities, but I'm talking about Mississippi and Alabama and places like that. So those are just two. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are just two examples of some challenges I see in the rare disease community.
I'll just maybe add another couple. Like if we think from a scientific perspective, one of the biggest challenges is delivery. So you can have this gene editing tool that works perfectly in cells, but like if you need to target the brain disease, for example, the challenge is how do you get those tools successfully to the brain or to the organ that is needed in order to be effective at the treatment of these diseases. That's why there is also a lot of innovation. Like we have heard about lipid nanoparticles, but there are many viral and non-viral vectors trying to solve this problem. And I feel like this is a bigger problem than like the actual tools or new therapeutic modalities that we are looking at. Another challenge is like, I guess, funding for all these companies that are focusing on rare diseases, because often the pharma are the bad guys because like the high price of drugs, but specifically if you look at these new therapeutic modalities, the cost to produce such technologies, and get them to the patient, it's really expensive. And there is need of obviously investing in either, the smaller companies that are doing this kind of research, because when the market goes well, like our investors and everything, like they also opt for rare diseases, because oftentimes even for bigger pharma, it might be a greater way to get some technologies into the market. And maybe like the last challenge I want to mention related to that is regulatory and how do you bring these technologies to market? Because I think that there is like maybe a shifting the mentality of the FDA a bit with these technologies. Usually those are platform technologies. So if you can prove that gene editing tools, for example, can correct a disease and it's been proved through clinical trials, maybe you don't need to go from the very beginning and the small molecules assets that you need to do a phase 1, 2, 3, you can just skip some of those. And once the targets are validated, just have shorter approvals for others, specifically because it's also very difficult to find patients sometimes to participate in those trials.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
right.
So Sharon, I want to come back to you about diagnosing people with rare disease. Could you talk to me a little bit about that? And, what are some of the things that you're seeing there?
Mhm. Well, as we look at these advanced therapies, many of them, the earlier you treat, the better. Pre-symptomatically would be wonderful, but if you have, it's very difficult to get a condition, for example, on a newborn screening panel, if you don't have a therapy, a treatment for the disease. Well, so what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you
Right.
can't find patients and treat them in the most beneficial window, how do you move forward a therapy? It just seems I'm continually struck by that chicken and egg. What has to come first? What needs to come first?
And is there always a diagnostic for each disease, or is that part of the challenge?
I think that's part of the challenge with newborn screening, creating those assays. But I will say, if we could find patients sooner, because I think there are a lot more CLN1 patients out there than 350 to 400. I just think we haven't diagnosed them. And for the earlier onset phenotype of the disease, I think these children die before they're ever diagnosed. My daughter happened to have the later onset version. She lived to be 20. She was diagnosed just before her 8th birthday. What if she could have been diagnosed at birth?
Right.
We could have started this journey much earlier. We could have, I wonder sometimes
Sure.
what we could have achieved if we had
Started.
diagnosed her already.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern, right? Because you see it across other diseases where the disease just progresses to a point where you can detect it with the current diagnostics that we have. And then from there, okay, it might be too late. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And my
having
daughter,
earlier-
she had genetic testing twice and it was a cost thing. She was diagnosed early, I'll say. Instead of that 5 to 7 year window, she was diagnosed within 2 years. And it's because another child in the same city where we live was diagnosed with another subtype of Batten disease,
Wow.
a later onset subtype, and Taylor's form of the disease looks similar, particularly in the beginning. So a neurologist diagnosed this other child with CLN3, and they made the assumption that my daughter had CLN3. She was tested for CLN3, came back negative. It took months for another doctor who had more expertise with Batten disease to say, oh, I think your daughter has a later onset of CLN1.
Wow.
And then we were retested again.
Right.
Well, this was 13, 15 years ago. Testing was pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Testing, the cost of diagnostic testing has come down. Why are we so afraid of that? Of diagnosing early and
We
getting the
shouldn't be.
treatments to people when they need them, the right patient at the right time with the right medicine.
Right.
Amen.
You've been saying
Yeah.
that for
Amen.
years about
Right.
personalized medicine, right? So,
Yeah.
any other comments from the panel?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I think she covered it
I
pretty
think you
well.
covered it
Biomarkers
really well.
are very important, so it would be great if other companies could also invest on increasing those numbers in terms of diagnostics. So there is kind of part of the effort of training also the community doctors and so on. As you said, you had to see multiple specialists until you got there. So I think there is work to do from different parts as well.
I also think something that you said, which is early beats late. And I think you and I talked about this in one other time. A lot of companies say that they're patient-centric and they're all for the patient. Everybody says that they've got a boardroom named after a patient or whatever. But unless you're really involving the patients and the caregivers and the doctor early,
Sure.
early,
Yeah.
right? Early beats late.
Yeah.
Okay.
absolutely.
And so those companies that are patient-centric are the ones that are saying, we're going to invite you into the boardroom. We're going to invite you into our strategy. We're going to invite you from the beginning.
Yeah.
Not, we have an AdCom in
Right.
2 weeks. Let's round up some patients and trot them out and try to get an outcome. That's just not a good way to do business. And so I just think that is also an issue that it's uneven across the industry about companies that are really, truly patient-centric. And that's not to say that the ones who aren't are bad actors. They may not know how to do it,
Right.
right?
Yep.
That doesn't make them bad people, but the best companies, the companies that are really leading, the Ultragenics, the Chiesi's, the companies that are really building great companies around rare diseases, they're involving patients and their patients.
This is
When we
important,
listen to
yeah.
patients, we are going to find the way forward. Absolutely.
For sure.
Listen to patients,
Yeah.
and you'll get the answers you need.
And I was just going to add that it's very important with these new therapeutic modalities to understand the patient community, because there is still fear. People don't know what those mean, right? Like we saw the first CRISPR treatment approved like last December. Here it was an ex vivo treatment, but like many people don't understand what this entails. And it might be different, like the perception or the willingness to take such a treatment if you already have some kind of standard of care that maybe is a patching treatment, or depending on the disease, those that don't have any cures might be more willing to take them. But I think it's very important to educate also the patients and get their opinion on like what are their pain points to make sure that you are providing a solution that is actually needed.
Amen.
Yeah. So my last question for the panel is centered around the path forward as well as breaking down silos. So Patroski, why don't we come back to you and sort of start with you on this one, and then we'll expand it to the rest of the panel.
Sure. I've been talking a lot lately, and certainly in the last couple of years, around the need to move forward with a rare disease moonshot, like a national plan of action that's from the, administration, Congress on down to the patient community and everyone in between, to say, okay, what's our ultimate goal? What is the ultimate goal? And I think it's therapies, it's treatments, it's that 95% of therapies of diseases where there are no therapeutic or treatment options. We should be attacking that. Okay. And companies and patients and providers and policymakers and the press and you name it should all have a seat at the table to try to figure out what is our national plan going to look like for the next 25 years. And then with Kennedy, President Kennedy said in a famous speech to Congress that I believe by the end of the century, we'll put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade or something like that. I wasn't born, but I heard about it. I read about it. And I think that sort of national resolve around rare diseases is what's needed.
Yeah, I feel like that term moonshot has been used and then not followed through on so many fronts. And then like you, right, I would love to see, how do you just take massive action? How do we just, regardless of whatever challenges that we have in 1 year or 1 decade or 5 years, a half a decade, how do we just take massive action? And, whatever name that we give that, if we don't follow through, we end that name and we figure out then how to, overcome these challenges, right?
And I want to add one more thing here. I think we need to get over this fear of the cost of these therapies. I'm afraid that the fear of cost is shutting down this wonderful science that, yes, a lot of it is government supported, industry supported, and then we're so afraid to get it to the people who need it. This wonderful science. But you know what? We're still paying those costs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I have a closet in my daughter's room that is stacked with boxes that has copies of bills and, and my husband and I stopped counting when we went well over $1 million to take care of her and it was doing nothing more than trying to make her comfortable as she headed toward the inevitable ending. What if we were spending that money to actually give children like Taylor, patients, give these rare disease patients, give them better lives? I'm not even saying cures. I'm saying better quality of life, longer life potentially.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
We're spending the money. Let's do it well. And I think we've got to figure out a way together. Patroski and I were saying together we go faster.
Yeah.
Together we have got to figure out a way to move these therapies to the patients that need them. Knowing what we spent, the suffering that my child went through, I would say these therapies are worth. They are worth, they have value. They are worth the cost.
For sure. Any final comments from the panel?
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna add, like, but it's important to standardize these across countries. They have different regulations, and it seems like it's very difficult to go through those, from regulatory to the pricing. And obviously, like, some countries can afford less than others, but like, as we say at Chiesi, that we don't want to leave any patient behind. So it's important to work all together to make sure that also those patients that maybe are far away from treatment, or like, they cannot afford it, like, there is kind of a consensus and support to provide better solutions. And specifically because in rare diseases, usually time is key. You cannot wait 12 years for a clinical trial to go through to see if the drug, will work. It's just either this drug or nothing. If we were to work together to expedite this process, I think that would make a real difference to those patients.
Well, I wanted to thank my fellow panelists here on the rare disease panel here at Bullpen. And thanks a lot for all of your comments and also for all of your actions inside of rare disease. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.